The Harley-Davidson roared into the parking lot of Roadside Traditions Diner, its chrome pipes flashing in the late afternoon Arizona sun. The motorcycle was as much a statement as its rider Jack Steele, who swung his leg over the seat with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention. At 42, Jack's muscular frame filled out his worn leather vest adorned with patches that told stories of 1,000 miles and 100 conquests. The vest's back displayed the snarling emblem of the Steel Wolves Motorcycle Club, a pack he'd founded and led with iron discipline for the past 5 years. His weathered face, framed by salt and pepper stubble, wore the permanent lines of someone who had seen too much and smiled too little. The only softness in his appearance came from his eyes, steel blue, that occasionally betrayed flashes of something deeper, something wounded before hardening again into cold disdain. Jack adjusted his leather gloves, surveying the modest diner with a dismissive glance. The neon sign flickered weakly against the gathering dusk, promising home cooking and open 24 hours. The parking lot held a scattered assortment of pickup trucks and sedans, working people's vehicles. Nothing impressive, nothing worth his respect. Inside, Emma Clark wiped down the counter with practiced efficiency, her movements betraying a slight limp from an old injury that ached more on long shifts like today's. At 30, Emma possessed the kind of beauty that didn't announce itself with fanfare, but revealed itself slowly in the quiet determination of her hazel eyes, in the gentle curve of her smile, when she greeted regulars, in the graceful economy of her movements despite her injury. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her blue uniform, with its red-trimmed apron, had seen better days. But she wore it with the dignity of someone who understood that honest work carried its own nobility. 7 years of serving at Roadside Traditions had taught her to read customers instantly. She could distinguish the decent tippers from the stoifers, the talkers from the quiet ones, the kind from the cruel. When the door swung open with unnecessary force, the bell above it jangling discordantly, Emma didn't need to look up to know that trouble had just walked in. She felt it in the sudden tension that rippled through the diner, in the way conversations dropped to whispers, in the shift of energy that made the hairs on her neck stand up. Jack Steele took a booth by the window, sprawling across the vinyl seat like he owned it, his boots deliberately scuffing the recently mopped floor. 2 younger members of his motorcycle club flanked him, their nervous energy a stark contrast to Jack's controlled arrogance. "We'll be with you in just a minute," Emma called out, finishing with her current customers, an elderly couple who had been coming to the diner every Thursday for the past decade. Jack didn't acknowledge her words, instead pulling out his phone and scrolling with performative boredom. The message was clear: his time was valuable, hers was not. Emma delivered fresh coffee to the elderly couple, her smile genuine, as the old man told his weekly joke. Their warmth was a momentary shield against the chill that had entered with the bikers. As she turned to approach Jack's table, her foot caught on an uneven floor tile, the one Harold had promised to fix for months, and she stumbled, slightly wincing, as pain shot through her bad leg. The coffee pot in her hand tilted, a few drops splashing onto the floor. It was a minor mishap, barely noticeable, but Jack's laughter cut through the diner like a blade. "Maybe you should consider a job that doesn't require walking," he called out loud enough for everyone to hear. His companion snickered dutifully. Emma straightened, absorbing the humiliation like she had absorbed so many other small cruelties over the years. She approached their table coffee pot, steady now, her professional smile fixed in place. "Welcome to Roadside Traditions. What can I get for you today?" Jack leaned back, eyes traveling over her in a way that made her skin crawl. The moment stretched uncomfortably before he finally spoke. "Coffee, black, and make sure the cup is clean this time." This time, as if he'd been here before, as if she'd served him previously. Emma knew he hadn't, and the deliberate lie was designed to undermine her, to establish dominance in their first interaction. As Emma poured his coffee, she noticed the distinctive emblem on his vest, a wolf's head with steel fangs bared in a snarl surrounded by flames. Something about it triggered a memory, a newspaper article, a whispered conversation. The Steel Wolves, road accidents, territorial disputes with rival gangs, and something else, something personal that hovered just beyond her grasp. When she returned with menus, Jack ordered without opening his, demanding a complex combination of substitutions and special preparations that wasn't on the menu. His tone made it clear this wasn't about food preferences. This was about power, about making someone scramble to accommodate impossible demands. "I'll see what I can do," Emma said, maintaining her composure. "You do that, sweetheart," Jack replied, his smile not reaching his eyes. "And try not to trip on your way to the kitchen. We wouldn't want another accident, would we?" The word accident hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. Emma felt a cold shiver run down her spine as fragments of memory began aligning into a pattern she wasn't ready to see. In the kitchen, Emma leaned against the stainless steel prep table, taking a moment to steady her breathing. Harold, the diner's owner, looked up from the grill, concern etching deeper lines into his already weathered face. At 68, Harold Reynolds had the compact, powerful build of the Navy SEAL he had once been, though decades of civilian life had softened him around the edges. His close-cropped white hair and perpetually sunburned face gave him the appearance of a man who spent more time outdoors than in the kitchen, but his hands moved with surprising grace as they flipped burgers and dressed plates. "Those jokers giving you trouble?" he asked, nodding toward the dining room. "Nothing I can't handle," Emma replied automatically, then hesitated. "The one in the vest, the leader. There's something familiar about him. About that motorcycle club." Harold's spatula paused mid-flip. "The Steel Wolves," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "They've been around these parts for a few years now. Bad news mostly." Emma rubbed her temple, chasing the elusive memory. "Did my father ever mention them?" The question hung between them, loaded with 7 years of grief and unanswered questions. James Clark had been more than just Emma's father. He had been Harold's best friend since their Navy days, a brilliant chef whose career had been on the verge of national recognition before the motorcycle accident that took his life and derailed Emma's own culinary ambitions. Harold's gaze shifted, focusing intently on the sizzling grill. "Your dad worried about a lot of things, Em. Motorcycle gangs might have been on the list." It wasn't a real answer, and they both knew it. Emma began assembling the complicated order, her movements automatic, despite the customizations. Before her father's death, before she'd abandoned culinary school to care for her ailing mother, cooking had been more than just a job. It had been a passion, an inheritance, a connection to her father. Even now, working in this modest diner, her hands remembered what her heart tried to forget. "He's going to complain no matter what I bring him," Emma said, more to herself than to Harold. "Men like that always do." Harold glanced through the service window at Jack, his expression darkening. "Some people just need to feel powerful, even if it means making others feel small." He wiped his hands on his apron. "But you know what your father used to say? A meal should reveal the soul of its maker, not the status of its eater." Emma finished with a sad smile. It was one of her father's favorite sayings, a philosophy that had guided his approach to cooking in high-end restaurants and family barbecues alike. As Emma arranged the plates, Harold stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Emma, there is something you should know about that man out there. I think I recognize him. He was—" The kitchen door swung open as Darlene, the other waitress, rushed in with a stack of dirty dishes. "Table 6 needs their check, and 7 just got seated," she announced, oblivious to the tension she'd interrupted. Harold stepped back, the moment broken. "We'll talk later," he murmured to Emma, returning to the grill. Emma nodded, loading Jack's complicated order onto her tray, unaware that later would come too late to prepare her for what was about to unfold. As she pushed through the swinging door into the dining area, Emma felt the weight of Jack's gaze following her. There was something predatory in it, yes, but also something searching, as if he were trying to place her in some mental catalog. She set his plate down carefully along with his companion's simpler orders. "Will there be anything else?" Jack inspected the food with exaggerated scrutiny, prodding at the steak with his fork. "This doesn't look medium rare to me." The steak was perfectly cooked. Emma had made sure of it, but she knew that wasn't the point. "I can take it back if you'd like." "No," Jack said, his tone dismissive. "I don't have all day to wait for your kitchen to figure out what medium rare means." One of his companions snickered, but the other seemed uncomfortable, focusing intently on his burger as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world. As Emma turned to check on her other tables, Jack's voice stopped her. "You know, you remind me of someone." Emma froze, not turning back immediately. When she did, she kept her expression neutral. "I have that kind of face, I guess." Jack's eyes narrowed slightly. "No, it's specific. Have we met before?" "I don't think so. I would remember." "Would you—" Jack tilted his head, studying her. "What's your last name?" The question was too personal, too probing. Emma felt her professional mask slipping. "Is there something wrong with your food, sir?" Jack smiled, but it was a cold expression that never reached his eyes. "Just making conversation. Good customer service includes being friendly, doesn't it?" Before Emma could respond, Jack reached for his wallet, and as he pulled it out, something fell from his pocket, a small photograph worn at the edges. Emma automatically bent to pick it up, and in that brief moment, she saw the image, a young boy, perhaps 10 or 11, smiling widely, his front tooth missing. As she handed it back, their fingers brushed, and Jack snatched the photo away with unexpected ferocity. "Don't touch that." The naked emotion in his voice, raw, unfiltered pain, caught Emma off guard. For just a second, she glimpsed something human beneath the calculated cruelty. But the moment passed and Jack's face hardened it again. "Your father," he said abruptly. "What did he do?" The question coming out of nowhere hit Emma like a physical blow. "Excuse me, your father," Jack repeated, his tone casual but his eyes intent. "Was he a local?" Emma took an instinctive step back. "I need to check on my other tables." Jack caught her wrist, his grip firm but not quite painful. "It's a simple question." Emma pulled one, her heart hammering. "My father is none of your business." Something flickered in Jack's expression, recognition perhaps, or confirmation of a suspicion. "Is," present tense. "So he's still alive then?" The casual cruelty of the question stole Emma's breath. Her father had been dead for 7 years, his absence a wound that never fully healed. "Enjoy your meal," she managed, walking away with as much dignity as she could muster, feeling Jack's eyes boring into her back. For the next 20 minutes, Emma moved through the diner on autopilot, taking orders, delivering food, making small talk with regulars. But her mind kept circling back to Jack Steele, to the Steel Wolves emblem, to the nagging feeling that there was a connection she wasn't seeing. When she passed their table again, Jack called out, "Hey, waitress, how about a real challenge?" Emma stopped steeling herself. "Yes. I hear this place claims to have the best food in the county," Jack said, gesturing around the modest diner with open skepticism. "Prove it. Make me something special, the best thing on or off your menu. If I'm impressed, I'll leave a tip that'll make your week. If not..." He shrugged, the threat implicit. It was a trap, Emma knew. No matter what she brought, he would find fault with it. The game was rigged from the start. But something in her pride, perhaps, or her father's stubborn spirit, refused to back down. "Any allergies or dietary restrictions I should know about?" she asked, her voice cool and professional. Jack seemed surprised by her acceptance of the challenge, a fleeting expression quickly masked by renewed arrogance. "None. Amaze me if you can." As Emma headed back to the kitchen, she heard Jack say to his companions, "$10 says whatever she brings is garbage. These places always are." One of them laughed, but then added, "Remember that fancy place in Phoenix that we taught a lesson, man? That was something else." Emma's steps faltered. Phoenix, a restaurant, a lesson. The kitchen door swung shut behind her and she leaned against it, her mind racing. 7 years ago, before her father's death, he had been consulting for a new high-end restaurant in Phoenix. There had been an incident, a group of bikers causing trouble, property damage threats. Her father had been a witness. And 3 days later, he was dead, his motorcycle veering off a desert road with no explanation, no skid marks, no mechanical failure identified. The official report called it an accident. Emma had never fully believed it. "You okay, Em? You look like you've seen a ghost." Harold's concerned voice pulled her back to the present. "That man out there," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The Steel Wolves. They were involved in that incident at Emilio's in Phoenix, the one Dad witnessed." Harold set down his spatula, wiping his hands deliberately on a towel. His face had gone very still. "You remember that?" "Not all of it, but enough." Emma pushed away from the door, moving closer to Harold. "There's more, isn't there? Something you never told me." Harold's weathered face seemed to age another decade in the space of a heartbeat. He glanced at the service window, ensuring they weren't overheard. "Your father was going to testify about what he saw at Emilio's. It wasn't just vandalism, Emma. There was a drug deal happening in the back alley. Big one. Your dad stumbled onto it when he took out the trash." The implications hit Emma like a physical blow. "And 3 days later, he was dead." Harold nodded grimly. "The police investigated, but there was no evidence of foul play." Just another motorcycle accident on a desert road. But you never believed it, Emma said. It wasn't a question. Neither did you. Harold placed a hand on her shoulder. Emma, that man out there, Jack Steele, he was there that night at Emilio's. I recognize him from the security camera footage the police showed me. The world seemed to tilt beneath Emma's feet. Her father's killer, or at least someone connected to his death, was sitting in her section eating food she had served, demanding more from her. He doesn't know who I am, Emma realized aloud. He's fishing, trying to figure it out. You need to stay away from him, Harold warned. Let me handle their table. But Emma was already shaking her head, a cold resolve settling over her. No, he challenged me to make him something special, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. Harold's eyes widened as understanding dawned. Your father's recipe, the awakening burn. Emma nodded, moving toward the spice cabinet, where they kept the special ingredients, the ones not used in everyday diner cooking. Emma, that dish isn't meant for revenge, Harold cautioned. Your father developed it as a way to awaken dulled senses, to cut through emotional numbness. It's powerful, too powerful for casual use. I'm not using it for revenge, Emma said, though the line between justice and vengeance had begun to blur in her mind. I'm using it for truth. If he was involved in Dad's death, I'll see it in his reaction. The awakening burn was more than just a spicy dish. It was a carefully calibrated sensory experience using a combination of heat aromatics and specific flavor compounds that triggered memory and emotional responses. James Clark had developed it during his research into culinary neuroscience, a passion project that had fascinated both the scientific and culinary communities. In the wrong hands, it could be weaponized. In the right ones, it could break through walls of denial and repression, bringing buried truths to the surface. Harold hesitated, then nodded once decisively. I'll help you, but be careful, Emma. Men like that are dangerous when cornered. Together, they began preparing the special dish, a seemingly simple steak with a complex sauce that contained the carefully formulated compound of spices, herbs, and other ingredients that made the awakening burn unique. As she worked, Emma found herself falling into the familiar rhythm of serious cooking, something she hadn't done since abandoning culinary school. Her hands remembered what her conscious mind had tried to forget, moving with precision and purpose, measuring and mixing with intuitive skill. From her pocket, she withdrew the silver spoon she always carried, a talisman, a memory, a connection to her father. Engraved with the words, "Truth through taste." It had been her father's most prized possession, a gift from his mentor. He had been holding it the day he died, and the police had returned it with his personal effects. Now Emma used it to taste and adjust the sauce, feeling her father's presence guiding her movements. As she worked, she could hear Jack's voice carrying from the dining area, loud and boastful, telling some story about teaching a lesson to someone who had disrespected him. He's showing off, Harold observed, keeping his voice low, making sure everyone knows he's the alpha. Men like that always do, Emma replied, focusing on the sauce. They mistake fear for respect. When the dish was nearly complete, Emma paused, suddenly uncertain. Was she crossing a line, using her father's creation as a tool for what might amount to vigilante justice? Harold seemed to read her thoughts. Your father believed that food could reveal truth about the cook, about the eater, about the moment they shared. That's all you're doing, revealing truth. Emma nodded, drawing strength from his words. She finished plating the dish, the steak perfectly cooked. The sauce artfully drizzled, the presentation worthy of the high-end restaurants where her father had once worked. This wasn't diner food. This was culinary art with a purpose. It's ready, she said, taking a deep breath. Harold looked at the plate, then at Emma. Whatever happens next, your father would be proud of you. Not just for this, but for everything. For your strength. Emma blinked back, unexpected tears steadying herself. Thank you. As she pushed through the swinging door, balancing the plate carefully, Emma felt a strange calm settle over her. Whatever Jack Steele's connection to her father's death, she was about to create a moment of truth between them. Jack was mid-story when she approached, gesturing expansively to his increasingly uncomfortable-looking companions. So I told him, either you pay up what you owe, or you'll be drinking through a straw for a month. Guess which one he chose? He broke off as Emma set the plate before him with professional precision. The steak was seared to perfection, the sauce glossy and aromatic, the presentation impeccable. It looked like it belonged in a five-star restaurant, not a roadside diner. Jack's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. Well, well, Looks like someone's trying to earn that tip after all. Emma stepped back slightly. The chef's special, not on the menu. We reserve it for guests looking for something extraordinary. The sarcasm in the word guess was subtle but unmistakable. Jack caught it, his eyes narrowing slightly before his arrogant smile returned. "Let's see if it tastes as good as it looks," he said, picking up his knife and fork. Emma remained by the table waiting. In her peripheral vision, she could see Harold watching intently from the service window. Jack cut into the steak, the meat yielding perfectly to reveal the ideal medium-rare center. He speared a piece, dragged it through the sauce, and raised it to his mouth. The moment stretched time, seeming to slow as the fork completed its journey. Jack took the bite, chewed once, twice, his expression shifting from skepticism to surprise. "Not bad," he admitted, sounding almost disappointed at having to give the compliment. Then it hit him. The awakening burn worked in stages. First came the flavor complex, rich, utterly delicious. Then the heat, not the straightforward capsaicin burn of chili peppers, but a more complex layered heat that seemed to open neural pathways rather than simply stimulate pain receptors. And finally, the awakening, the rush of sensory clarity that broke through emotional barriers, bringing suppressed memories and feelings to the surface with unstoppable force. Emma saw the exact moment when the third stage began. Jack's pupils dilated suddenly. A fine sheen of sweat broke out on his forehead. His hand, reaching for his water glass, trembled slightly. "What?" he began, his voice hoarse. "What's in this family recipe?" Emma said calmly. "My father's specialty." At the word father, Jack's face went pale beneath his weathered paint. His eyes locked onto Emma's, really seeing her for the first time. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice barely above a whisper. Before Emma could answer, Jack's boot caught the edge of her foot as she stood beside the table. Whether intentional or a startled reaction, the effect was the same. Emma lost her balance, her bad leg buckling beneath her. She went down hard, landing on her knees beside the table. The diner seemed to go silent, all eyes turning toward the unfolding scene. Jack stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. In his hand, he still held his plate with the remainder of the steak, the sauce now flambéed from the decorative candle on the table, a dramatic effect that cast his suddenly haggard face in demonic light. He looked down at Emma kneeling on the floor, and something shifted in his expression, a complex mixture of recognition, fear, and something that might have been shame, quickly buried beneath defensive anger. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he growled. Then with deliberate cruelty, he tilted the plate, pouring the flaming sauce and juices over Emma's shoulder and back. The hot liquid soaked through her uniform, not hot enough to seriously burn, but more than uncomfortable enough to humiliate. His companions laughed nervously, the sound hollow and forced. Around the diner, gasps of shock and murmurs of disapproval rose from the other customers. Emma remained on her knees, enduring the pain and humiliation with a dignity that seemed to infuriate Jack further. She looked up at him, meeting his gaze without flinching. "My father always said sometimes you have to experience pain to see the truth," she said quietly. "Your main course is still waiting, Mr. Steele." The use of his name, which she had never been told, hit Jack like a physical blow. His eyes widened, the pupils still dilated from the awakening burn's effects. In the flickering light, his face seemed to shift between present and past, between the arrogant biker and a younger man haunted by actions he couldn't undo. "You don't know what you're playing with, girl," Jack said, but the threat in his words was undermined by the tremor in his voice. In defiance of the sauce still dripping from her uniform, Emma rose to her feet with slow deliberation, never breaking eye contact. "Finish your meal," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions beneath. "There's more truth waiting in every bite." Jack looked down at the remainder of the steak on his plate, the sauce now casting an almost supernatural glow in the dimly lit diner. Around them, the other customers watched in tense silence, sensing they were witnessing something more significant than a simple dispute between a rude customer and a waitress. With a visible effort to regain control, Jack sat back down. Pride and bravado wouldn't allow him to walk away from the challenge, now not with so many witnesses. He cut another piece of the steak, raised it to his mouth, and took a second bite. This time there was no hiding his reaction. The second wave of the awakening burn hit harder than the first, breaking through whatever psychological defenses remained. Jack's face contorted, not with the pain of spice, but with something deeper. Memories flooding back, emotions long suppressed, rising to the surface. "You're Clark's daughter," he whispered, the fork clattering to his plate. "James Clark." Emma said nothing, fretting. Jack's companions shifted uncomfortably, sensing the situation had moved beyond their understanding. One of them reached for Jack's arm. "Hey man, maybe we should go." Jack shook him off, his eyes never leaving Emma's face. The third bite of the awakening burn steak had broken through his final defenses, leaving him raw and exposed. "I was there," he said, his voice barely audible. "The night your father died, I was there." The confession hung in the air between them, a truth 7 years in the waiting. In the kitchen doorway, Harold had gone completely still, one hand moving instinctively toward the small of his back where Emma knew he kept the gun he'd carried since his Navy days. "Tell me," Emma said, her voice steady despite the thundering of her heart. "Tell me what happened to my father." Jack's expression crumpled, the arrogant facade falling away completely. In its place was something Emma had never expected to see: genuine remorse. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that." He said the words tumbling out, as if he'd been waiting years to speak them. "Nobody was supposed to get hurt. It was just supposed to be a warning." Around them, the diner had gone completely silent, every ear straining to catch the confession. Even Jack's companions seemed frozen, exchanging alarmed glances as their leader unraveled before their eyes. Emma felt a strange detachment, as if she were watching the scene from above. 7 years of questions, of grief, of uncertainty, all about to be answered by this broken man whose defenses had been stripped away by her father's final gift, the ability to reveal truth through taste. What was supposed to be a warning? She asked, her voice surprisingly gentle now. Jack looked up, his eyes haunted. "The accident. Your father's accident. It wasn't supposed to be fatal. Just enough to scare him, to keep him from testifying. But something went wrong. The bike went over the edge. I tried to save him." The last words were a whispered plea for understanding, for absolution that Emma wasn't ready to give. In the silence that followed, the bell above the diner door jangled as a new customer entered, a tall man in a leather jacket different from the Steel Wolves design. His eyes scanned the room, settling on Jack with predatory focus. "Well, isn't this cozy?" the newcomer said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. Jack Steele getting all emotional with the locals. The boys back at the clubhouse would love to hear about this. Jack's head snapped up, fear replacing remorse in an instant. "Razor, what are you doing here?" The man called Razor smiled, the expression never reaching his cold eyes. "Looking for you, brother. We've got business to discuss. Private business." His gaze shifted to Emma, lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. "Though I might stick around for dessert. This place seems to have some sweet offerings." The tension in the diner ratcheted up another notch. Emma felt herself caught in the middle of something far more dangerous than she'd anticipated: a power struggle between rival bikers, with her quest for truth as the unwitting catalyst. As Razor took another step forward, Harold emerged fully from the kitchen, his stance shifting subtly into the ready position of a man prepared for combat. "I think you gentlemen have had enough for today," Harold said, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of command. "Time to settle up and move along." Razor's hand drifted toward his waistband. "This doesn't concern you, old man." "That's where you're wrong," Harold replied evenly. "Everything that happens in my diner concerns me." The standoff stretched the air electric with potential violence. And in the middle stood Emma Sauce, still dripping from her uniform, the silver spoon with its engraving, "Truth Through Taste," clutched in her hand like a talisman, caught between past and present, between justice and vengeance, between the truth she'd sought and the danger it had unleashed. Jack stood slowly, his movements careful, deliberate. The effects of the awakening burn had left him raw, exposed, but also strangely centered. He positioned himself between Razor and Emma, his back to her, facing his rival. "This is between you and me, Razor," he said, his voice low. "Leave the girl out of it." Emma realized with startling clarity that Jack Steele, the man connected to her father's death, the arrogant biker who had humiliated her minutes earlier, was now trying to protect her from a greater threat. The irony wasn't lost on her, nor was the sudden understanding that the truth about her father's death was far more complicated than she had imagined: a web of rivalries, mistakes, and regrets that had claimed her father as an unintended casualty. As Razor's hand closed around whatever weapon he carried, Emma made a split-second decision. She touched Jack's arm lightly. "The truth isn't finished with you yet," she said quietly. "Neither am I." The stage was set for confrontation, Jack's past and present colliding in a small Arizona diner with Emma at the center of a storm 7 years in the making. The awakening burn had done its work, breaking through walls of denial and deception, revealing truths long buried. But revelation was just the beginning. What came next would determine whether truth led to justice, redemption, or further tragedy. And Emma Clark, daughter of James Wilder, of her father's culinary legacy, found herself suddenly, unexpectedly, ready to face whatever came next. The truth, like the special sauce still warming her fingers, had been set aflame. There would be no extinguishing it now. Time seemed suspended in the tense atmosphere of Roadside Traditions Diner. The afternoon sunlight slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Razor's hand remained poised at his waistband, his cold eyes calculating as they shifted between Jack, Emma, and Harold. The other patrons sat frozen in their booths, unwilling witnesses to the unfolding drama. "I said this is between you and me," Jack repeated, his voice steadier now, though the effects of Emma's special dish still visibly coursed through his system. Sweat beaded on his forehead and his hands trembled slightly, but his stance was protective as he positioned himself more firmly between Emma and the new threat. Razor's thin lips curved into something approximating a smile. "Always playing the hero when it's too late, aren't you, Jack?" His gaze drifted to Emma. "Tell me, sweetheart, did he mention how he held your daddy's hand while he bled out? How he promised to deliver a message to his family but never did?" The words hit Emma like physical blows. Her fingers tightened around the silver spoon in her palm, its edges digging into her skin. "What are you talking about?" "Don't listen to him," Jack said without turning around. "Razor wasn't there. He doesn't know what happened." "But I know what happened after," Razor countered, taking another casual step forward. "I know about the nightmares, the drinking, the way you've been carrying that man's death like an anchor around your neck for 7 years. He tilted his head, studying Jack with mock concern. "Is that why you came back here to confess to Daddy's little girl to ease your conscience?" Harold moved with the fluid grace of a man half his age, positioning himself strategically near the counter, where Emma knew he kept a baseball bat. "I think it's time for you all to leave," he said, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of command that had once directed Navy SEAL operations. Razor spared him a dismissive glance. "Stay out of this, Grandpa. We're having a conversation about old times." "Not in my diner," Harold replied evenly. The tension stretched tighter, the possibility of violence hanging heavy in the air. Emma found herself calculating distances, how many steps to the kitchen, to the back door to safety. But running felt impossible. She had waited 7 years for answers about her father's death. She couldn't walk away now, even as she recognized the danger swirling around her. Jack's shoulders tensed as Razor took another step forward. "Last warning," Jack growled. "Back off." Razor's hand finally emerged from his waistband, not with a weapon as everyone feared, but with a folded piece of paper. He tossed it onto the nearest table. "The Scorpions send their regards. They're calling in your debt, Jack. Tonight." The name Scorpions sent a ripple of recognition through Emma. The Desert Scorpions, a notorious rival motorcycle club known for drug trafficking and violence. The group rumored to have connections to several unsolved murders in the county. Jack's posture shifted subtly. "I told Santos I'm out. That debt was settled." Razor's laugh held no humor. "Nobody's ever out, Jack. You know that." His gaze drifted to Emma again, lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. "Interesting company you're keeping these days. Does she know about your boy? About how you tried to save her daddy because you couldn't save your own son?" The words landed like a grenade in the center of the diner. Jack flinched visibly, the protective barrier of his arrogance completely stripped away by the combined effects of Emma's special dish and the brutal reminder of his deepest pain. Emma's mind reeled, struggling to process this new information. Jack had a son, and somehow that connected to her father's death. The photograph that had fallen from Jack's wallet flashed in her memory, a young boy with a missing front tooth and his father's steel blue eyes. "That's enough," Harold said, moving forward. Now all pretense of casualness gone. "Take your business outside." Razor held up his hands in mock surrender, just delivering a message. He backed toward the door, his eyes never leaving Jack. "Midnight at the old quarry. Santos will be waiting." At the threshold, he paused, glancing once more at Emma. Ask him about Phoenix, sweetheart. Ask him what really happened that night at Emilio's. Then he was gone, the bell above the door jangling discordantly in his wake. Through the windows, Emma watched him mount a motorcycle adorned with the Desert Scorpion's emblem and roar away in a cloud of dust. The tension in the diner broke like a fever, nervous conversations resuming in hushed tones as the other patrons tried to process what they'd witnessed. Jack's companions shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances laden with unspoken questions. Jack himself remained motionless for several heartbeats, then turned slowly to face Emma. The arrogant biker who had swaggered into the diner was gone, replaced by a man who looked hollowed out, haunted by ghosts Emma was only beginning to glimpse. "We need to talk," he said quietly, "but not here." Harold stepped between them. "Emma's not going anywhere with you." Jack nodded, accepting this as his due. "Then let me talk to both of you, please." The word please seemed foreign on his lips, as if he rarely used it. "There are things you need to know. About James, about what really happened." Emma looked at the sauce still staining her uniform, felt the phantom warmth of it on her skin. The humiliation Jack had inflicted was still raw, but it paled in comparison to the need for truth that had driven her for 7 years. "The office," she decided, looking at Harold. "We'll talk in your office." Harold hesitated, then nodded once sharply. "5 minutes," he told Jack, "and your buddies wait out front." Jack turned to his companions. "Give me some time. Take the bikes to the gas station down the road. Get something to eat. I'll call when I'm done." The younger men didn't look happy about the arrangement, but they nodded and left without argument, the hierarchy of the club evident in their immediate compliance. Emma led the way to Harold's small office at the back of the diner, aware of Jack following behind her, of Harold bringing up the rear with vigilant eyes. The narrow room was cluttered with invoices, schedules, and the administrative debris of running a small business. A desk with a worn leather chair dominated the space, flanked by two mismatched visitor chairs. Harold closed the door behind them, positioning himself in front of it like a sentry. "Talk," he said to Jack, his voice clipped. Jack remained standing, his large frame making the small office feel even more cramped. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that seemed uncharacteristically vulnerable. "What was in that food?" he asked Emma, his voice hoarse. "It did something to me. Made me remember things I've spent years trying to forget." "The awakening burn," Emma replied, perching on the edge of Harold's desk. "My father's creation. It triggers memory and emotional responses through specific neurochemical pathways." Jack nodded slowly. "Your father was brilliant. I knew that even before—" He trailed off, then gathered himself. "Before the accident." "It wasn't an accident," Emma said flatly. "Was it—" Jack's eyes closed briefly, the weight of 7 years pressing down on his shoulders. When he opened them again, they were clear and direct for perhaps the first time since he'd entered the diner. "No," he admitted. "And yes, it wasn't supposed to happen the way it did." He began to pace the small confines of the office, his movements those of a caged animal. "7 years ago, I was different. The club was different. We were involved in things." He glanced at Harold. "Things I'm not proud of now." "Drug running for the Scorpions." Harold supplied his tone, making it a statement rather than a question. Jack nodded. "Among other things, we were the muscle, the delivery boys. The Scorpions kept their hands clean. We took the risks." His mouth twisted in a bitter smile. "And a cut of the profits, of course." "And my father saw something he shouldn't have," Emma prompted. "At Emilio's in Phoenix," Jack confirmed. "We were using the back alley for a handoff. Your father came out with the trash and saw everything face his product money changing hands. It was a major deal worth millions." Jack stopped pacing, his gaze distant as he relived the memory. "Santos, the Scorpion's leader, wanted your father eliminated immediately. Clean professional, no questions asked." Emma's breath caught. "But that's not what happened." "No." Jack's voice dropped lower. "I argued against it. Convinced Santos that a warning would be enough, something to scare your father into silence, without creating the kind of investigation a murder would trigger." "So you tampered with his motorcycle?" Harold said, his voice hard with barely contained fury. Jack shook his head. "Not me personally, but yes, the club arranged it. The brake line was cut partially enough that it would fail on a sharp turn or sudden stop, causing a crash that would look like an accident. It was supposed to happen in the city at low speed. Your father was supposed to be injured, scared but alive." "But it didn't happen that way," Emma whispered. Jack's expression contorted with what appeared to be genuine remorse. No, your father took his bike out on the desert roads that night. By the time the brakes failed, he was doing 60 on mountain curves. The bike went over the guardrail and down the ravine. A heavy silence filled the office as Emma absorbed this confirmation of her worst suspicions. Her father's death had not been a random tragedy, but a deliberate act, even if its fatal outcome hadn't been the original intent. You said you were there, she finally said, remembering his earlier words. You said you tried to save him. Jack nodded, his eyes haunted. I was following him, not to hurt him, to make sure he survived the accident, to deliver the warning afterward, make sure he understood what would happen if he testified. He swallowed hard. When I saw his bike go over the edge, I knew something had gone wrong. I raced down the ravine, found him thrown clear of the motorcycle. His voice grew hoarse. He was still alive, but barely. The injuries. There was nothing I could do except hold his hand while he died. He knew it too. He looked at me, and somehow he knew I was involved. Emma felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. What did he say to you? Jack reached slowly into his pocket and withdrew a small object, the silver spoon identical to the one Emma carried. He was holding this when I found him. He pressed it into my hand and said, "Tell my Emma the truth will come through taste." Those were his last words. Emma's hand moved unconsciously to her own pocket where her father's spoon rested. But you never delivered that message. No, Jack's admission was barely audible. I couldn't face you, couldn't face what I've been part of. He held out the spoon to her. I've carried this for 7 years, a reminder of my greatest failure. Emma stared at the offered spoon, her emotions a tempest of grief, rage, and confusion. Why come back now? Why this diner today? Jack's eyes met hers directly. Because today is the anniversary of my son's death. 5 years ago, a motorcycle accident, a real one. Drunk driver hit him head on. He was only 11, riding his dirt bike on our property. His voice cracked. Every year on this day, I ride out to clear my head, try to outrun the memories. I stopped here by chance. Amal took a deep, shuddering breath. And when you realized who I was? I didn't nod at first, just thought you looked familiar. Jack ran a hand over his face. Then I saw the way you moved in the kitchen through the service window, just like your father. And when you served me that dish, he shook his head in wonder. Whatever was in that food broke through walls I've spent years building. Harold, who had remained a silent, vigilant presence by the door, finally spoke. Why should we believe anything you're saying? You've admitted to being involved in James's death. For all we know, you're spinning tales to save your own skin. Jack nodded, accepting the suspicion as his due. I have proof, he said quietly. Records of all the operations the Steel Wolves ran for the Scorpions, names, dates, locations, including the order for James Clark's accident. I've kept it as insurance all these years. Insurance against what? Emma asked. Against the day Santos decided I was a liability. Jack gestured toward the door, indicating Razor's earlier visit. A day that apparently has arrived. Outside the office, the sounds of the diner continued, plates clattering, muted conversations, the coffee machine hissing. Normal life proceeding, while in this small room, the past and present collided with devastating force. So what happens now? Emma asked, her voice steadier than she felt. You've confessed to being involved in my father's death. That makes you an accessory to murder. Jack nodded, making no attempt to argue or justify. Yes, and I'll face that consequence, whatever it is. But first, there's something more important. His expression hardened with resolve. The Scorpions are planning something big tonight. The debt raiser mentioned it's my participation in a major drug shipment coming through the county. If I don't show, they'll hunt me down. If I do show but don't cooperate, he shrugged. Same outcome, just delayed. That's your problem, Harold said flatly. Not ours. It becomes your problem if they find out I've been talking to you, Jack countered. Santos leaves no loose ends. You've seen my face, you've heard my confession. That makes you both targets. Well, the implication hung heavy in the air. Emma exchanged a glance with Harold, seeing in his eyes the same grim acknowledgement of their new reality. So what do you suggest? Emma asked, surprised by the calm in her own voice. Before Jack could answer, the office door burst open. Darlene, the other waitress, stood there wide-eyed. Emma Harold, there are men outside, bikers with guns. They're surrounding the diner. Harold moved with its surprising speed for his age, crossing to the small window that overlooked the back parking lot. Desert scorpions, he confirmed grimly. At least 8 of them. He turned to Jack. Friends of yours. Jack's face had gone pale. Razor must have reported back to Santos immediately. They're not taking any chances with me talking. He pulled out his phone. I need to call my guys. Harold grabbed the phone from his hand. No, your guys are outnumbered and a shootout in my diner puts every innocent customer at risk. Then what's your plan? Jack demanded. Because in about 2 minutes, those men are coming through the door and they're not leaving anyone alive who can identify them. Harold's expression hardened into something cold and focused the face of the warrior he had once been. This place has survived 3 attempted robberies and 1 armed standoff since I took over. I'm not unprepared for trouble. He moved to his desk, unlocked the bottom drawer, and withdrew a pistol. Emma, take everyone out through the kitchen delivery entrance. There's a storm cellar under the storage shed out back. Get everyone inside and lock it from within. The combination is your birthday. Emma shook her head. I'm not leaving you alone to face them. You're not, Harold said grimly. He looked at Jack. Are you with us or with them? Jack didn't hesitate. With you, but we need more than 1 gun against 8 scorpions. Harold nodded once, accepting the alliance of necessity. Second drawer behind the tax files. And Emma, he said, his tone softening slightly. I need you to get the customers to safety. These men won't hesitate to use civilians as shields or hostages. Emma recognized the logic, but still hesitated, torn between flight and fight. The memory of her father's silver spoon pressed against her palm, and with it came a moment of clarity. There was more than one way to fight. I have a better idea, she said suddenly. Something my father was working on before he died. A variant of the awakening burn, more potent, designed for extreme situations. Harold's eyes widened in understanding. The cognitive cascade, Emma, that formula was never tested. Your father had concerns about its stability. What are you talking about? Jack interjected, his expression confused. Emma met his gaze steadily. A weaponized version of what you experienced earlier. Delivered as an aerosol, it causes temporary but complete sensory overload, disorientation, impaired coordination, extreme emotional vulnerability. My father developed it as a potential non-lethal deterrent for military applications. A nerve agent? Jack asked incredulously. No, Emma corrected. A neurochemical catalyst. It amplifies existing neural signals rather than blocking them. Completely organic, derived from food compounds. And temporary effects last 15 to 20 minutes at most. Harold looked skeptical. Even if it works, how would we deploy it without affecting ourselves? Emma was already moving toward the door. Localized ventilation. The kitchen hood system can be reversed to blow outward instead of suctioning. We'd need to reach the control panel and the storage room where my father's supplies are kept. Jack looked between them, clearly struggling to process this unexpected development. You're saying your father, a chef, created chemical weapons in a diner kitchen. My father was more than just a chef, Mama replied, a hint of pride cutting through her fear. He had multiple patents in culinary chemistry and consulted for several research institutions. The diner kitchen was just his most recent lab. A distant crash from the front of the building cut their conversation short. Harold checked his weapon with practiced efficiency. Decision time. We do this or we run. Emma squared her shoulders. My father deserves justice, and I'm tired of running from the truth. Jack nodded slowly. Tell me what you need me to do. The next 5 minutes unfolded in a blur of focused activity. While Harold directed the terrified customers toward the back exit, Emma led Jack to the small storage room adjacent to the walk-in freezer. Behind shelves of conventional spices and dry goods stood a locked cabinet labeled simply JC Research. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she entered the combination, her father's birthday. Inside were dozens of labeled containers, each with precise formulations of compounds her father had developed over years of experimentation. Third shelf blue container, she instructed Jack, pulling out several smaller vials herself. And the atomizer unit in the back. Jack complied without question, handling the containers with unexpected reverence. Your father was a genius, he said quietly. I never knew. Few people did, Emma replied, combining the compounds with practiced precision, despite the years since she'd last assisted with her father's work. He believed cooking was chemistry with soul, and chemistry was cooking with purpose. To him, there was no distinction between creating a perfect sauce and developing compounds that could affect human physiology. The sound of shouting from the main dining area added urgency to their movements. Harold appeared at the storage room door, his expression grim. They're inside, 8 men heavily armed. They're herding the remaining customers into the corner. We need 3 more minutes, Emma said, continuing her work, and access to the ventilation controls. Harold nodded. I'll create a diversion. Get to the control panel when you hear me engage them. Before Emma could protest, Harold was gone, moving with the silent efficiency of his SEAL training. Moments later, his voice boomed from the dining area. Gentlemen, this is private property, and you're frightening my customers. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. The response was a barrage of threats and obscenities barely audible through the closed kitchen doors, but clear enough in their intent. Emma finished the mixture, pouring it into the atomizer unit Jack held ready. This will deploy as a fine mist through the ventilation system. We need to be behind the exhaust when it activates. She handed him a small packet. Put this filter mask on when I tell you. It won't block everything, but it will minimize the effects. Jack took it, studying her with newfound respect. You're nothing like I expected. I could say the same about you, Emma replied, unable to fully process the complexity of her feelings toward this man, part of her father's death, yet now an ally in the face of a greater threat. The sound of Harold's voice grew more confrontational, clearly drawing attention to himself and away from the kitchen. Emma nodded to Jack. Now. They slipped through the swinging doors, keeping low behind the counter that separated the kitchen from the dining area. Through the service window, Emma caught glimpses of the scene: Harold standing defiantly before a group of leather-clad men, their backs to the kitchen as they focused on the perceived primary threat. The ventilation control panel was mounted on the wall near the grill station. Emma reached it, fingers flying over the switches to reverse the airflow. Jack positioned himself between her and the dining room, the pistol from Harold's desk held ready, but out of sight. Ready? Emma whispered, making the final adjustments. From the dining room, a new voice spoke, cold, authoritative, threatening. Where is Steele? The voice demanded. We know he's here. Haven't seen him, Harold replied, his tone deliberately casual. But I'll be sure to tell him you were looking for him if he stops by. The sound of a fist striking flesh made Emma flinch. Jack tensed beside her, his knuckles white around the pistol grip. Last chance, old man, the voice continued. Where is Jack Steele and who is he talking to? Put the masks on, Emma whispered to Jack, securing her own filter over her nose and mouth. Then help me get this into the vent. Together, they lifted the atomizer unit to the main outflow vent, securing it in place. Emma made the final connection, then hesitated, her finger poised over the activation switch. In that moment of hesitation, the kitchen door swung open. One of the scorpions, a tall, scarred man with dead eyes, stood in the doorway, weapon raised. Well, well, he said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. What have we here? Jack moved with unexpected speed, placing himself between Emma and the gunman. Santos, he acknowledged, his voice steady despite the danger. Been a while. Santos, the leader of the Desert Scorpions, the man who had ordered her father's death, leveled his weapon at Jack's chest. You always were too sentimental for this business, Jack. Now you're conspiring with the help. His cold gaze shifted to Emma. Though I admit she's pretty enough to distract a man from his loyalties. This isn't about loyalty, Jack replied. It's about doing the right thing. Finally. Santos laughed, the sound devoid of humor. The right thing? Since when do you care about that? He gestured with his weapon. Both of you out front. Now, we have some loose ends to tie up. Emma's fingers remained poised over the activation switch, hidden from Santos's view by Jack's body. She caught Jack's eye, a silent question passing between them. Jack gave an almost imperceptible nod, then addressed Santos again, taking a deliberate step forward that further shielded Emma. You know, there's something I've wanted to tell you for a long time, Santos. Save it for your eulogy, Santos sneered. I've got evidence, Jack continued, taking another step, on everything, every deal, every hit, every payoff, including James Clark's murder. And it all goes to the feds if anything happens to me. Santos's expression flickered with the first hint of uncertainty. You're bluffing. Try me, Jack challenged, taking a final step that put him directly in front of Santos. Kill me, and you'll spend the rest of your life in a supermax. Is that what you want for the mighty leader of the desert scorpions? The moment of distraction was all Emma needed. She flipped the switch, activating the atomizer unit. The ventilation system hummed to life, pulling the cognitive cascade compound into its airways and immediately dispersing it through the outflow vents into the main dining area. The effect wasn't instantaneous, but it was dramatic. Within seconds, confused exclamations came from the dining room as the invisible compound began affecting the scorpions gathered there. Santos turned momentarily distracted by the commotion from his men. Jack seized the opportunity, tackling Santos to the ground. The gun went off the bullet, embedding itself harmlessly in the ceiling. Jack and Santos grappled on the kitchen floor, a desperate struggle for control of the weapon. Emma darted past them toward the dining room, trusting in the filter mask and her partial immunity developed during her father's research. She emerged to find a scene of chaotic disorientation. The scorpions staggered around the dining room, their movements, uncoordinated expressions contorted in confusion. Some clutched their heads, others sank to their knees, overwhelmed by the sensory overload induced by the cognitive cascade. The compound worked exactly as her father had described, disrupting the normal processing of sensory input and triggering a flood of emotional responses that overwhelmed rational thought. Harold had already taken advantage of the chaos, disarming the nearest scorpion and using zip ties from behind the counter to secure his wrists. He nodded grimly to Emma, indicating she should help with the others while they were incapacitated. Behind her, the sounds of struggle continued as Jack and Santos fought for dominance. Emma hesitated, torn between helping Harold with the disoriented bikers and returning to assist Jack against Santos. The decision was made for her when Santos's voice rose in a howl of rage. "You think this changes anything, Steele? You're dead. Your club is dead. Everyone you ever cared about is dead." Emma turned to see Santos pinned beneath Jack, the gun, now in Jack's hand, and pressed against Santos's temple. Jack's face was contorted with 7 years of suppressed rage and grief, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Jack, don't!" Emma called out, suddenly certain that this moment would define not only Jack's fate, but her own ability to ever find peace. "He needs to face justice. Real justice. For my father." Jack's hand trembled, the desire for vengeance warring with the knowledge that another death would solve nothing. He ordered the hit. "Emma, he's the reason your father died." "I know," Emma said, moving closer despite the danger. "But killing him won't bring my father back. And it won't bring your son back either." At the mention of his son, something broke in Jack's expression. The mask of hardened biker fell away completely, revealing the grieving father beneath. "They deserve justice," he whispered. "Yes," Emma agreed, "and we'll get it for them. The right way." She held out her hand. "My father believed in truth through taste, not revenge through violence." For a long moment, Jack remained frozen, the gun still pressed to Santos's head. Then, with a shuddering breath, he pulled the weapon away and rose to his feet, keeping it trained on Santos but no longer threatening immediate execution. "You'll testify," he asked Emma, "about everything I've told you." "Yes," she promised. "All of it. The truth deserves to be known." Outside, the wail of approaching sirens cut through the tense atmosphere. Harold appeared in the kitchen doorway, nodding in satisfaction at the scene before him. "Anonymous tip to the sheriff's department," he explained, "about armed men threatening customers at my diner." He looked at Santos with cold contempt. "I think they'll be very interested in who they're about to arrest." As the effects of the cognitive cascade began to dissipate, leaving the scorpions dazed, but increasingly aware, Emma found herself standing beside Jack, united by a strange bond forged through tragedy and truth. The man who had sneered at her, humiliated her, and been involved in her father's death now stood as an unexpected ally in the pursuit of justice. "What happens now?" she asked quietly, removing her filter mask as the compound dispersed. Jack's expression was solemn, accepting of whatever consequences awaited him. "Now I tell the truth, all of it, and face whatever comes. Even prison. Even that," he agreed. "It's time to stop running from what I've done." As the first sheriff's deputies burst through the diner doors, weapons drawn, Emma felt a strange sense of completion. Not closure, for that would take much longer, but the satisfaction of finally confronting the truth she'd sought for 7 years. The silver spoon in her pocket seemed to warm against her skin. Her father's last message, truth through taste, fulfilled in ways neither of them could have imagined when he created the formulas that had ultimately revealed his killers. Outside the diner windows, the Arizona sunset painted the desert in shades of fire and gold, a fitting backdrop to a day that had begun with humiliation and would end with the promise of long-delayed justice not served cold, as the saying went, but with the burning clarity of truth revealed through taste. The interrogation room at the Oak Ridge County Sheriff's Department smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. Emma sat stiffly in the uncomfortable metal chair, her uniform still stained with sauce from hours earlier, a visceral reminder of how dramatically her day had transformed. The clock on the wall read 11:27 p.m., but time had become an abstract concept stretched and warped by the intensity of recent events. Detective Marissa Collins sat across from her, a woman in her 50s with shrewd eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who had heard every possible story during her 25 years on the force. She reviewed her notes, giving Emma a moment to collect her thoughts. "Let me make sure I understand," Detective Collins said finally. "Jack Steele, leader of the Steel Wolves Motorcycle Club, walked into your diner today and you served him a specially prepared dish that triggered. What exactly?" Emma's hands clasped together on the table, her father's silver spoon tucked safely in her pocket. "It's called the awakening burn. My father developed it before he died. It uses specific neurochemical compounds found in certain foods to enhance memory recall and emotional response." Detective Collins's expression remained neutral, but her raised eyebrow conveyed skepticism. "And this dish caused Steele to confess his involvement in your father's death 7 years ago." "It didn't cause anything," Emma clarified. "It merely broke through emotional barriers, making it harder to maintain denial or suppression of memories." The truth was already there. The awakening burn just brought it to the surface. Collins made a note. "And the substance used against the desert scorpions, the cognitive cascade, a more potent compound designed to temporarily overwhelm sensory processing. My father created it as a potential non-lethal deterrent for military applications." "Your father was quite the Renaissance man," Collins observed. "Chef, scientist, inventor." "Yes," Emma said simply. Pride warmed her voice despite her exhaustion. "He was." Collins flipped to a new page in her notebook. "According to Jack Steele's statement, Santos Rivera, leader of the Desert Scorpions, ordered your father's death after he witnessed a drug exchange behind Emilio's restaurant in Phoenix. The Steel Wolves carried out the hit by tampering with your father's motorcycle, though Steele claims they intended injury, not death." Emma nodded, her throat tight. Hearing the details laid out so clinically was different from experiencing Jack's raw confession hours earlier. "And Steele has provided evidence to corroborate this?" she asked. "A substantial amount," Collins confirmed. "Records, dates, names. Enough to build cases against both clubs. He's been documenting their activities for years, apparently, as insurance." "And what happens to Jack now?" Emma wasn't sure why she cared, but the question escaped before she could analyze it. Collins's expression softened slightly. "He's confessed to being an accessory to your father's death, among other crimes. But his cooperation and evidence will likely result in a reduced sentence. The district attorney is already discussing terms." Emma absorbed this information, her feelings toward Jack Steele still a complex tangle of anger, gratitude, and something less definable. He had been part of her father's death, yet he had also stood between her and danger when Santos arrived at the diner. The man who had humiliated her, who had poured burning sauce over her in a display of casual cruelty, had later risked his life to protect her. "There's something else you should know," Collins added, interrupting Emma's thoughts. "We found evidence in Santos's vehicle linking the Desert Scorpions to 3 other unsolved murders in the county, including the hit and run that killed Jack Steele's son 5 years ago." Emma's head snapped up. "What, Santos killed Jack's son?" Collins nodded grimly. "It appears so. The timing coincides with Steele's efforts to distance himself from the Scorpions' more violent operations. We believe it was both retaliation and a warning. This new information casts Jack's actions, both past and present, in an even more complex light. The man had lost his son to the same criminal organization he had once served, an organization that had also been responsible for her father's death. The parallel tragedies created an unexpected bond between them, a shared grief that transcended their adversarial beginning. "Does Jack know this yet?" Emma asked. "He's being informed now," Collins replied. "Which leads me to something uncomfortable. Santos made threats against you during his interrogation. Given your role in his capture and the evidence you can provide, we believe these threats should be taken seriously." A cold weight settled in Emma's stomach. "What kind of threats?" "The kind that suggest you might need protection until the trial," Collins said carefully. "We can arrange for a deputy to look in." "I'll be fine," Emma interrupted. The thought of being shadowed by law enforcement, of having her life further disrupted by fear, was intolerable. "The diner has security systems, and Harold is a former Navy SEAL. He's not going to let anything happen to me." Collins didn't look convinced. "Santos has connections even from inside county lockup. The Scorpions won't simply disappear because their leader is in custody." Before Emma could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. Collins rose to answer it, exchanging quiet words with someone in the hallway before returning to her seat. "Jack Steele is asking to speak with you," she said, watching Emma carefully. "You're under no obligation to see him." Emma hesitated. Part of her wanted nothing more than to walk away, to begin the process of healing, now that she finally had answers about her father's death. But another part recognized that this conversation might be necessary for her own closure. "I'll see him," she decided. Collins nodded, then left to make the arrangements. Minutes later, Jack was escorted into the room by a deputy who positioned himself by the door. Jack's hands were cuffed in front of him, and he moved with the stiffness of someone who had been sitting in one position for hours of interrogation. The arrogant biker who had swaggered into the diner was gone, replaced by a man who looked older, more vulnerable, the weight of his choices evident in the slump of his shoulders. "Thank you for seeing me," he said, lowering himself into the chair Collins had vacated. His voice was rough, as if he'd been talking, or perhaps shouting, for a long time. Emma nodded, not trusting herself to speak immediately. Up close, she could see the toll the day had taken on him, the shadows beneath his eyes, the lines etched deeper around his mouth. "They told me about your son," she said finally, "that Santos was responsible." Jack's hands tightened into fists, the cuffs jingling softly with the movement. "5 years," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "For 5 years, I've been looking in the wrong direction, blaming myself, blaming fate, and all along it was Santos." "I'm sorry," Emma said, and was surprised to realize she meant it. Jack looked up, his eyes red-rimmed but clear. "You have nothing to be sorry for. I'm the one—" He stopped, seeming to gather himself. "I wanted to tell you that I've given them everything. All the evidence, all the names. Everyone involved in your father's death will face justice." "Including you," Emma said softly. He nodded, accepting this as his due. "Including me. And I want you to know I'm not fighting it. Whatever sentence I get, I've earned it." Emma studied him, this complicated man who had caused so much pain, yet now seemed determined to make what amends he could. "Why did you come to see me? Just to tell me that—" Jack hesitated, then reached carefully into his pocket, mindful of the watching deputy. He withdrew a folded piece of paper and slid it across the table to Emma. "What's this?" she asked, not touching it. "The location of your father's research journals," Jack explained. "After the accident, when I found him, he told me about a storage unit where he kept copies of all his work. He made me promise to tell you about it. Another promise I failed to keep." Emma stared at the paper, her heart racing. Her father's research, his life's work beyond cooking, had seemingly died with him. The prospect of recovering it, of continuing what he had started, sent a surge of emotion through her that was almost overwhelming. "Why now?" she asked, her voice unsteady. "Why not 7 years ago?" Jack's gaze dropped to his cuffed hands. "Because I was a coward. Because facing you meant facing what I'd been part of. And because—" He hesitated, then continued with painful honesty. "Because after my son died, I couldn't bear to look at anyone else's grief. It was like drowning and being unable to reach out to another drowning person." The raw vulnerability in his words struck Emma. Despite everything, despite the rage that still simmered beneath her surface, she found herself able to glimpse the human being behind the monster she'd imagined for 7 years. "My father believed everyone deserved a second chance," she said finally. "That's why he created the awakening burn, not as a weapon, but as a tool for healing, for helping people face truths they needed to confront." Jack nodded slowly. "It worked," he said with the ghost of a smile. "Not in the way either of us expected, but it worked." A knock at the door signaled the end of their time. The deputy stepped forward, indicating Jack needed to return to his cell. As he rose, Jack looked at Emma one last time. "I can't undo what happened to your father. I'd give anything if I could, but I hope—" He broke off, shaking his head. No, I don't have the right to hope for anything. Just thank you for hearing me out. Emma watched him go, the conflicting emotions within her no closer to resolution. She picked up the paper he'd left, tucking it into her pocket alongside her father's spoon. Whatever came next, whatever justice the courts delivered, she had reclaimed a piece of her father that had been lost for 7 years. And perhaps that was enough for now. 1 year later, the sign above the renovated building on Oak Ridge's Main Street gleamed in the morning sunlight. Second Chances, Culinary Academy and Restaurant. The former gas station had been transformed, its industrial bones now supporting a warm, inviting space that blended professional kitchen with welcoming dining room. Emma stood on the sidewalk, taking in the culmination of a year's worth of work, planning, and healing. Her father's silver spoon, now framed alongside his photograph in culinary awards, held a place of honor on the wall just inside the entrance. Beside it hung a plaque detailing James Clark's innovations in culinary science and his commitment to using food as a force for positive change. Harold emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. At 69, he moved more carefully than he once had, but retirement had softened the military precision of his bearing. Since selling the roadside Traditions diner 6 months earlier, he had thrown himself into this new venture with unexpected enthusiasm. The first class arrives in an hour, he reminded Emma. Nervous? She smiled, adjusting a place setting at one of the tables. A little. It's not every day you launch a culinary program for former inmates. The concept had come to her during the long months of Santos Rivera's trial as she sorted through her father's recovered research journals. James Clark had been developing not just culinary innovations, but an entire philosophy around food's power to transform lives. The awakening burn and cognitive cascade were merely the most dramatic examples of his belief that properly prepared food could open pathways to healing and change. The program Emma had created, funded partly by victim compensation from the Rivera case and partly by grants she'd secured, would provide culinary training to recently released inmates, giving them marketable skills and a supportive community during their transition back to society. The bell above the door jingled, drawing Emma from her thoughts. Detective Collins entered out of uniform today in jeans and a casual blazer. Looks amazing, she said, taking in the space. Your father would be proud. Emma accepted the compliment with a nod. Over the past year, she and Collins had developed a tentative friendship, bonding over late-night discussions about justice, forgiveness, and the complex gray areas that lay between. Any news? Emma asked, the question casual but loaded with meaning. Collins understood immediately. He's being transferred to the minimum security facility next week. Good behavior and continued cooperation with ongoing investigations have earned him some consideration. Jack Steele had ultimately received a 10-year sentence, reduced from the potential 25 he might have faced without his cooperation. The man who had once led the Steel Wolves with arrogant impunity now spent his days teaching motorcycle repair skills to other inmates and, according to Collins, speaking to at-risk youth about the real consequences of gang involvement. Emma's feelings toward him remained complicated, a mixture of lingering anger, reluctant respect, and something like understanding. They had exchanged letters a few times during the year, cautious communications that acknowledged their strange connection without attempting to define it. He mentioned your program in his last update to me, Collins added, seemed genuinely pleased about it. Before Emma could respond, Harold called from the kitchen. First deliveries here. Need some help with these supplies. The moment broke and Emma excused herself to assist with the morning deliveries. The rhythm of restaurant preparation was familiar and comforting, checking inventory, prepping stations, reviewing recipes. By the time the first students were due to arrive, Emma had settled into the calm focus that kitchen work always brought her. At precisely 10 a.m., the front door opened. Emma looked up, expecting to see the group of former inmates who had been selected for the inaugural class. Instead, a single man stood in the doorway, uncertainty evident in his posture, despite his imposing physical presence. Jack Steele looked different in civilian clothes, jeans, a simple button-down shirt, work boots. The leather vest with its Steel Wolves emblem was gone, as was the swagger that had once seemed an essential part of him. His hair was shorter, streaked with more gray than she remembered, and his face had lost some of its hardness. Emma froze, coffee pot in hand, momentarily unable to process his presence. You're supposed to be in prison, she finally managed. A ghost of his old smile touched his lips. Good behavior and some unexpected developments. My sentence was commuted to time served plus 5 years probation. He hesitated, then added, Collins didn't tell you I was coming. Emma shook her head, placing the coffee pot down carefully as she gathered her composure. She mentioned your transfer, not your release. Jack nodded, accepting this. I can go if you want. When I heard about your program, I thought maybe. He trailed off, then straightened. I have skills to offer. Offer. Mechanical knowledge, construction, and experience. Not in the kitchen, obviously, but in maintaining, equipment building things. If you could use that. The request caught Emma completely off guard. Of all the scenarios she'd imagined for their next encounter, if there was ever to be one, Jack Steele asking to join her culinary rehabilitation program had never crossed her mind. Why? She asked simply. Jack took a deep breath, seeming to choose his words carefully. Because I need to build something good for a change. Because your father's work deserved better than what happened to him. And because... He paused, then continued with quiet intensity. Because I've spent 12 months thinking about second chances and whether someone like me deserves one. Emma studied him, searching for any hint of the manipulative, cruel man who had swaggered into the diner a year earlier. Instead, she saw only raw honesty and the same haunted look that had been in his eyes when he confessed his role in her father's death. There's a condition, she said finally, for anyone who works here. Jack nodded, waiting. Emma moved to the wall where her father's silver spoon hung framed. Beside it was a second frame containing an identical spoon, the one Jack had carried for 7 years. Everyone who joins this program takes an oath, she explained. Truth through taste. It means honesty in all things, with yourself, with others, with your work. No shortcuts, no deception, no running from the hard truths. She turned back to face him. Can you live by that? The question hung between them, weighted with all that had passed her father's death. Jack's confession, Santos's arrest, the unexpected connections that had formed through tragedy and truth. I've been trying to, Jack said quietly, every day for the past year. Emma considered this, then nodded once decisively. The maintenance workshop is through the back. Harold could use help setting up the equipment before the students arrive. Relief and gratitude washed over Jack's features. Thank you, he said simply. As he moved toward the kitchen, Emma called after him. Jack. He turned back questioning. This doesn't mean I've forgotten or fully forgiven. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. I wouldn't expect you to. Some things can't be erased, only lived with. He hesitated, then added, but thank you for the chance to try to balance the scales even a little. As Jack disappeared into the back, Emma returned to her preparations, emotions churning beneath her composed exterior. The past year had taught her that justice rarely came in the perfect form. One imagined that closure was not a single moment, but a process with steps forward and backward along the way. By the time the first real students arrived, 6 men and 2 women recently released from various correctional facilities, Emma had settled into a tentative peace with Jack's unexpected presence. The program would be challenging enough without the added complication of their shared history, but perhaps that history was precisely why this work mattered. She watched as Harold introduced Jack to the group as their maintenance instructor, noting the respect with which he addressed each student, the absence of the condescension that had once been his default mode. Welcome to Second Chances, Emma said, addressing the group once introductions were complete. Before we begin, I want to share something. My father believed that food has the power to reveal truth, to heal divisions, and to create connections where none existed before. She gestured to the framed spoons on the wall. Truth through taste. That's our philosophy here. In cooking, as in life, the honest path is rarely the easiest, but it's the only one that creates something of lasting value. As she spoke, her gaze briefly met Jack's. An understanding passed between them, not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement. They had both been changed by the events that began in a roadside diner a year ago, when a waitress served justice to a biker who thought himself beyond accountability. The first day of classes proceeded smoothly, the students moving through basic knife skills and kitchen safety protocols under Emma's guidance, while Harold handled the business aspects and Jack worked on installing the last pieces of equipment in the maintenance shop. By evening, when the students had departed and the kitchen was clean, Emma found herself alone with Jack and Harold in the main dining room. An awkward silence settled over them, the day's activities no longer providing distraction, from the complex emotions that still simmered beneath the surface. Harold broke the tension, placing 3 coffee cups on the table. "I think we've earned this," he said, filling each cup from a carafe. Jack accepted his with a nod of thanks, but remained standing as if uncertain of his place in this moment. "Sit," Harold instructed gruffly. "We've got planning to do if this program is going to work." As Jack lowered himself into a chair, Emma noticed for the first time the toll prison had taken on him. Beneath the physical changes, the weight loss, the new gray in his hair, there was a humility that had replaced his former arrogance, a carefulness to his movements that spoke of lessons learned through difficult experience. "I have an idea for the mechanical training component," Jack said after a moment. "Something that could integrate with the culinary program rather than being separate." Emma looked up curious despite herself. "What kind of integration?" "Food trucks," Jack explained, warming to the subject. "We restore and rebuild them as part of the mechanical training. The culinary students develop the menus and run them. It creates 2 career paths that support each other plus a revenue stream for the program." The idea was unexpectedly insightful, combining practical skills with entrepreneurial opportunities in a way that addressed multiple aspects of post-incarceration challenges. "That could work," Emma admitted, surprised by Jack's thoughtfulness. "We'd need additional funding, though." "I might be able to help with that," Jack said carefully. "As part of my agreement with the DA, I surrendered most of my assets, but my legal counsel managed to set up a restitution fund from what remained. It's not enormous, but it might be enough to get started." Harold raised an eyebrow. "You're offering to fund part of this program?" Jack nodded, his expression solemn. "It seems right that whatever I built through wrong means should be dismantled and rebuilt for something better." He looked at Emma. "Something your father would have approved of." The mention of her father brought a familiar ache, but it was softer now, tempered by time and by the knowledge that his work lived on through her. "He would have liked the symmetry of that," she acknowledged. As they continued discussing logistics, Emma found herself watching Jack with new eyes. The man who had once poured burning sauce over her in a display of casual cruelty was now offering to help build something meaningful from the ashes of his former life. It was a transformation as unexpected as it was profound. Later, as Jack prepared to leave for his probation-approved housing, he paused at the door. "I know today was a shock," he said to Emma. "If you decide this arrangement isn't going to work, I'll understand." Emma considered her response carefully. "My father had a saying about difficult recipes: judge the dish when it's plated, not when the ingredients first meet." She met his gaze directly. "We're still in the early stages of preparation here. Let's see what emerges." Jack nodded, accepting the cautious opening for what it was. "Thank you for today," he said simply, then left the bell above the door jingling softly in his wake. Harold moved to stand beside Emma, watching through the window as Jack walked away. "You sure about this?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "No," Emma admitted, "but then I'm not sure about any of this. I just know it feels right to try." Harold nodded, understanding in his weathered features. "Your father would be proud of you, you know, not just for the program, but for your capacity to see beyond black and white. That was always his gift, too." As they locked up for the night, Emma paused by the framed spoons, her fingers lightly touching the glass that protected her father's most treasured possession. "Truth through taste," she murmured. The words that had once been merely a family motto had become a guiding philosophy, one that had led her through grief to a place where healing, however complicated, however imperfect, seemed possible. Outside, the Arizona sunset painted the sky in shades of possibility. The diner where it all began was now under new ownership. Jack Steele was a changed man working to make amends, and Emma Clark had transformed her father's legacy into something that offered second chances to those society had written off. Not justice served cold, as the saying went, but something more complex and ultimately more satisfying. Justice served with understanding, with purpose, and with the recognition that the most meaningful transformations often began with a single courageous choice to face the truth. As Emma turned the key in the lock of second chances, she felt her father's presence more strongly than she had in years, not as a ghost of grief, but as an enduring inspiration. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new students, new opportunities to heal old wounds. And for the first time in 7 years, Emma found herself looking forward rather than back, ready to write the next chapter of a story that had begun with a sneering biker, a determined waitress, and a plate that served justice in the most unexpected way.